The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Modern Therapist's Guide to Nothing, where on each episode we take a topic, theme, thing, overanalyze it, and make it all make sense in the scheme of life, living, and mental health. My name is Dave. I am joined here with my co-host, Greg, aka you're just staring at me right now, waiting for it. I don't have an AKA.
Dude, the first bit of research you should do is Greg's.
I was gonna do gregarious Greg, but I was like, what does that mean? I don't even know.
What's gregarious?
Gregarious. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
gregarious. I like gregarious better though.
Yeah, me too.
Gregarious Greg.
Dave, let's not do that thing that sometimes podcasts do, and they're talking, and then we're like, what even is this about? Let's tell them what this is about. It's about something. Yeah. All right. So I'll take it upon myself. We're talking about OCD today.
Oh, so you want us to not do the thing that we do every other episode where you go through a long explanation of all the things touching about the topic, but never actually say what it is until eventually we tell them?
Yeah. So we're going to say it first, and then I'm going to do that long thing.
Okay.
So it's OCD. And, I suffered from OCD. And maybe I guess in a lot of ways I still do. But I've managed to really tone down the symptoms, and what I do for work certainly helps.
Wait, you're trying to tell me gregarious Greg suffers from OCD?
Yeah. You noticed that I flipped the light switch on 77 times before I started this podcast. Yeah. That's we're kidding, obviously, and I can make light of it a little bit because, hey, laughter is the best medicine, A, and B, it's something that I've definitely struggled with and had a hard time with. OCD can be rough. So it's a pattern of irrational thoughts and fears that we can call obsessions that lead you to do sometimes repetitive behaviors, or I'm doing the quote fingers, compulsions. And what the compulsions do is they neutralize or soothe the obsession, but just temporarily, and provide you with a nice little kiss of dopamine, which makes you feel a little bit better.
A nice little mwah.
Yeah, which is the most insidious part of it. Because in that instant, your brain is saying, how did I get that little mwah? Oh, yeah, I made him flick the lights all these times. Or I gave him these horrible thoughts, and he did some kind of ritual or compulsion, and it made it go away. And that's how I got the good thought. So you get into this loop, and it's kind of tough.
Yeah.
Let's do something off the top, and maybe you can help out with this a little bit. What are some of the misconceptions of OCD?
Well, I think one of the misconceptions is kind of goes along the lines of what that joke that you said in the beginning of like the light switch 77 times. I think people assume that OCD is always about something that has to do with like these rituals. It does include rituals, but it's not isolated to just compulsions that involve rituals where like you have to do this up and down the stairs 5 times before you can actually go up the stairs or whatever. I think that's one of the misconceptions.
Yeah, like when I think about the misconceptions, I usually think of people who are like, my house is so clean, I'm OCD, or my everything's in order, I have OCD. And I don't think that's really it, because OCD has to be the thing we talked about before, that's ego dystonic. It doesn't feel good. You don't want to do those compulsions. So if cleaning was a compulsion and an answer to one of the obsessions, you wouldn't want to do it. You would be like annoyed to do it because it doesn't feel good, Yeah. So you're sort of compelled to do it. So I think what I'm saying is there has to be, if I don't do this thing, then what? What's going to happen?
Yeah. So, I always ask people that, and I think about that as like, when you're thinking about your compulsion or the obsession, and what the compulsion is to relieve that obsession, why do you feel the need to do that? Like, what would happen if you don't do that?
Right. And what do you hear?
Right.
What do you hear from people, though?
Oh, I mean, some people have little insight, and some people think it's, something serious will happen. So it's kind of like ranges, right?
Yeah, like sometimes it's this ambiguous thing where it's just they know something bad will happen, or they know if they don't do it in like a half hour, they're going to be like racked with anxiety. But sometimes it's something very specific, like if I don't do this thing, my family's going to pass away, or like things like that. I mean, for real. It can be very intense.
We'll get into some interesting ones that people aren't as familiar with, because I know that when I was learning about this, I was uncovering some obsessions that I didn't even really know were a thing, but apparently are pretty common. Well, not common, but common within the OCD realm. But we'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay, so I guess we can we can jump right into those obsessions. But before I do, I guess to wrap up misconceptions, if it's rational, it's not OCD.
Well,
right,
and we'll go through the signifiers a little bit later, like what qualifies it. But yeah, I think people need to understand actually no, just go and listen to our concept creep episode and then come back to this one and you'll understand what we're talking about here. I think the idea of the term OCD has really started to spread to a point where now it's used in a very non-appropriate way, correct? Now it's like, who's a little over the top with cleanliness or washing their hands or, whatever it might be, that, or their habits or whatever, now it's, oh, that person's OCD, or, oh, I'm so OCD.
Yeah, so that's not going to be the case. OCD it's almost like debilitating. It's really tough. So what's good about it? Well, we can get into what.
Yeah, we're going to get into the signifiers.
Let's get into the obsessions. Let's get into these things.
Before we have the compulsion, we have the obsession, right? Greg, could you explain what an obsession is? It's
an intrusive thought or something that's going to make you worry, or I guess I'm going to have a heart attack, or I just unwanted intrusive thoughts, right?
Yeah. And so as you mentioned, they cause some sense of urgency, danger, but it's often something unlikely. It's not to say that it's out of the realm of ever being able to happen, but it's most likely not a common occurrence that fear is going to happen. Right.
Yeah, but isn't that kind of what makes it worse in a way? Yes. They're not likely.
You know what it reminds me of? Have you heard the idea of all right, let's say you have this person who calls you constantly. And if you really want to get that person to stop calling you, let's say they constantly are calling you. If you sporadically pick up once every 10 or 12 calls, you're actually reinforcing it and they're going to continue calling because there's always that chance, right? But if you never pick up ever, you have to be super strict and never pick up, then eventually they will understand they're never going to pick up for me. It's not going to happen. It's completely. So that's the thing. These fears that they have in reality, there's a chance, a slight chance, but there's a chance that thing could happen. It's not a common.
Well, yeah. And also what I mean too is it's not likely that if I don't step over this crack with my left foot, that my mom's going to fall down the flight of stairs. But I'm going to do it anyway. And that makes me uncomfortable because I know I'm doing something irrational, but I know I'm compelled to do it at the same time. It's very tough. That's where I'm talking ego dystonic. It doesn't feel good.
And think about this, for someone who, let's say they leave a window unlocked. Let's say their obsession is about safety and they have to, before they leave the house, they have to make sure every single window is locked and the doors are locked. And then one day they missed one window, or they think they might have missed one window. And that thought doesn't leave their head because there's always that slight possibility that an intruder might go in that window. Is that going to happen? Is the intruder definitely going to know that window is unlocked on that specific day for this person who never forgets to lock their windows? Probably not. Very unlikely that an intruder will know and will go on that one specific day. But that obsession is going to be so strong for that person because no one can say for certain that it's definitely not going to happen.
So you're touching on a good thing. There's never that sense. It's like people who suffer from OCD never get that feeling of certainty, oh, it's all taken care of. Did you lock the doors? Yes, I did, and I feel good about that. That thing you're talking about, the window. That person, they go downstairs, they lock all the windows. They go upstairs, they get in their bed, and they're like, in the process of locking all the windows, is there any way that I might have unlocked a window when I meant to lock it, and then they got to go back downstairs again, and it just becomes this thing that they do over and over and over again, to the point where it's why even leave? Or I'm going to sleep downstairs. It changes your life. It makes you avoid, which we always hate, and it's tough. It's tough to deal with.
and for most of us, like we would all probably have this fleeting thought from time to time, like, oh, did I remember to lock all the doors, or did I remember to lock the window before I left? But we would probably rationalize it and say, well, honestly, I'm only going to be gone for a few hours. What's the odds that that's going to happen? Or fingers crossed, nothing bad happens, and we'll be able to kind of move on with our day. For that person with OCD, though, they can't just move on with their day. That obsession is going to take over, and that's where the compulsion part plays, because that's that I need relief from this feeling that I'm getting, that the obsessions are giving me.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We're all spread pretty thin, and it can be easy to ignore our own needs. We can get caught up in life, concerning ourselves with social life, stress, work. It can be easy to start to neglect ourselves, feeling lost, drained, or overwhelmed.
You're absolutely right, Greg. Therapy can help by providing us the tools you need to improve your mood and understand you can't help others without helping yourself. One of the things that has prevented people from the help they need is accessibility. Whether it's transportation, time, getting an appointment in a timely manner, or even issues that prevent you from leaving the house.
And therapy, being even more accessible, is where BetterHelp comes in.
BetterHelp is entirely online, convenient, and flexible.
But Dave, here's something I'm worried about. What if we get matched with a therapist and it just really isn't a good fit?
Well, Greg, that's one of the best features of BetterHelp. If for whatever reason the therapist isn't a fit, you can switch therapists completely free.
And that's going to save you any awkwardness, hard feelings, and just avoiding that tough conversation. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/nothing today to get 10% off your first month.
That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nothing, NOTHING, for 10% off your first month.
Dave and I believe very deeply in therapy.
So much so, we've devoted our entire lives to it.
So go to betterhelp.com/nothing.
And get that better help you need today.
I read this thing a while ago about Billy Bob Thornton. Did you hear about his OCD?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And he's afraid to go to plays because he thinks he'll get on stage and mess with the play. So then he avoids going to the plays. Yeah. But what he's doing there is saying to his brain, oh, you know that like super irrational fear that you have? You just validated it. And now that leaves room to, for other irrational fears to grow. You just said to yourself, yes, you're right, brain. I may go up there and mess with the people on the stage. Listen, I don't go to the Providence Place Mall, or at least I really avoid it, because I think I'm going to go to the third floor and just whoop, right off the side of the rail. Yeah. I don't want to do that, but I feel like I would. And even driving over bridges, sometimes I have that, you have that urge, just, what if I just kind of just jerk the car over to the right and go off the bridge? I don't want to do that, but it scares me. And that's what's hard about OCD. And you can see how like these thoughts that people sometimes have about harming people can be very tough because they're afraid they're going to do it. But I think that what these obsessions actually do, especially the harming ones, is they highlight our values. If we wanted to harm our family members, or if we wanted to drive off the bridge and we didn't value our life, we wouldn't mind these thoughts. We would like them. We'd be like, oh yeah, that's right. Like if someone was thinking, oh, I'm going to harm my kids, and it's bothering them and it's making them feel uncomfortable, then that's a good sign. That's a fantastic person. But if they're having those thoughts and they're like rubbing their hands together and smiling, then we got some issues there. But the obsessions, they somehow manage to like attack our values somehow. Don't you notice that?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a few themes that we could highlight here that obsessions tap into. So, I think you're bringing up the Billy Bob one is interesting, because that's that fear that they're not going to have any impulse control. That's right. An interesting one. So there's contamination, which is a common one that we hear about. I think that's one that with OCD people naturally assume it's something along those lines. So that's the feeling like you need to wash your hands a number of times, like you're dirty, like there's germs on you or something like that. So imperfections would be another one. So kind of that hyper focus on organization or on cleaning. Religious fear, something like along the lines that God's going to punish you for your sins if you do certain acts, things like that.
Or punish your family.
Yep.
Actually, I have an interesting case involving religion, and which kind of reminds me of the example we gave with the windows. It's so this guy, a very religious person. Well, I shouldn't even say that. They believed in God, and they grew up very religious. And when they had an intrusive thought about, maybe like it would often be like almost pedophilia kind of thoughts, right? And that's not who this person was. It really made them uncomfortable. So as soon as they had those thoughts, they would sit down and pray. And in the middle of praying, they would have an intrusive thought while praying of maybe the same kind of thing. And that would send them right back to the beginning of the prayer. Oh, got to start all over. Yep. And start praying all over again. So this is the kind of loop that you can get in. It could be very time consuming and stressful.
I was sharing with you the other day. I have a child patient who's he's a little bit older. He's an older teen. He's dealing with those same thoughts, and I hadn't really thought of them in the realm of OCD. And now I'm starting to see that it's turning into an obsession for him. That feeling that I'm having these thoughts that make him feel like he's a pedophile, and that really upsets him. So one of the things you mentioned earlier, which I thought was a great point, was that highlighting your values. So the fact that you're having this intrusive thought and that's so upsetting to you, and that you can't even stand to think about yourself in that way, it actually just highlights the fact that that's not who you are, and that your values are actually the opposite of what that intrusive thought is. And reminding him of that, and it has been important, but very hard, because then he gets the intrusive thought again. So it's turning into the cycle. So I just thought that was an interesting one that I wasn't really too familiar with as far as obsessions go, with that fear of pedophilia.
Yeah. It certainly highlights. Because if he was thinking, all right, I'm having these thoughts of pedophilia and I have to hide that because societally it's bad, or I could get in trouble with the law, then if he's talking to you in that way, then that's a different story. Then that's just not who I am. I don't want to think that way. I hate these thoughts so much, because you don't choose intrusive thoughts. You have them. And people with OCD have really strong reactions to them. They give them more salience than other people might. Like if you had a weird thought, like if you were driving over the bridge and you had a thought like, oh, I might just pull this thing off the bridge, you would probably laugh it off, or it might not be that big deal to you. Where me, I might struggle with that a little bit more and be like, okay, I'm not doing that. Why would I do that? Why would I think that? Am I the kind of person that does that? You know what I mean? That's the kind of like pattern I would get into. And it took a lot of practice to be able to tone that down. And we're going to give some people some tips on how to do that. But what about losing your mind? Some people are just afraid they're going to completely lose their mind, or maybe they already have. They have this obsessive thought that they're quote unquote crazy. And I
health issues in general, right?
Health issues in general. But I think that especially with the I'm losing my mind, I think what's kind of beautiful about that with OCD is OCD almost provides you with the antidote to psychosis. Because if you think about it, if you're always so focused and thinking about losing your mind, you're never really losing your mind. You could never actually lose your mind if you're always thinking about it. When we see people who are in a state of psychosis, they're not thinking they're in a state of psychosis. They're enjoying it. Like it's like we talked about with schizophrenia, too much dopamine in the wrong spot. I mean, it's ego syntonic, right? They're okay with it. You see a manic, like a bipolar episode and a manic episode. They're not like, oh no, this is happening to me again. Oh no, I don't want to feel this way. Where OCD, they're kind of like not enjoying it and noticing it, you know?
I agree with you. I agree with you, but I also wonder how much of that is something that's like a portrait painted by Hollywood and movies that we watch, where we almost envision people who are losing their mind being very present, and they're losing their mind. And I can picture like a person unraveling on screen, and they're like,
I'm starting to lose my mind.
Yeah, right. But we know in reality, if you were losing your mind, you wouldn't be realizing that you're losing your mind. You'd be very not present in that moment. So that is an interesting point.
Right. So I think there's reasons to rest assured with OCD. There's upside and downside to everything.
I was just going to mention, just a couple more. The fear that bad things are going to happen. So a car accident, maybe an intruder, as I mentioned before, something along those lines. And then another interesting one that wasn't too familiar with is the fear of homosexuality.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
Which I had never heard of that case until I started doing some research on this. So that's an interesting one as well.
It's like that Seinfeld episode too, where it's always like, not that there's anything wrong with it. You know what I mean? Like it's always that, like, I always think that I am. I see like a poster with a guy with his shirt up. I'm not talking about myself here, but I'm just saying. And like people would think like, oh no, like, and am I having any certain feelings towards that and obsess on that?
Sure.
And I've had people talk to me about this, and it is very much that sense where it's like, I'm not homosexual, but not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't have any problem with homosexuality. It's just not me, and I'm struggling with why I can't. It's usually like adolescence, though. I see that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what's funny though? Like if you wanted to, it seemed like you didn't want to move quite that quickly off of obsessions. And I have a list of intrusive thoughts that I often show patients that not just people with OCD, but people in general just sort of experience as normal. Do you want to hear some of them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Driving into a window, running a car off the road. That's kind of a popular one. Cutting off your finger. That's common. Jumping off a high place. I definitely identify with that. Jumping in front of a car, pushing someone in front of a car, insulting strangers, hurting strangers, insulting an authority figure, stabbing a family member, choking family member, everything like taps left on, breaking a window, shoplifting, breaking wind in public is on this list. It's an obsessive thought. It must be an older list. I feel like that's something my meme would have said.
Breaking wind.
Yeah. Just, things like that. Kissing an authority figure. Some of them are sexual that way too, where it's like you'll just have sex with anyone. You'll just grab someone and try to have sex with them.
The thing, other than breaking wind, the thing that I saw in common with all of those was it's back to that idea that people don't feel like they have control of their impulses.
Yeah. And we do, surprisingly, pretty well, for the most part, right? But even so, I would use people all those again. If I was treating someone with that it wouldn't be my only approach. But one approach would be talking about history, like how many times have you broke wind in public? Like in an elevator or something like that. Oh, 0 times. So there's a 0% chance as of right now.
Nobody said 0 times.
Well, I mean, all right. So what I'm okay, like how many times have you plummeted to your death from the Providence Place Mall railing? I would say that to myself. Oh, 0 times, Greg. There's a zero history of that. Then what is the likelihood of you doing it now if it's happened 0 times? That helps. I want to jump into these compulsions.
Yes. So
let me first say what it is, and then we can get into them. They relax the anxiety. They soothe the anxiety, as you were speaking about earlier. And it's that dopamine, that insidious dopamine release that we were talking about.
Yeah, so it might include, checking things over and over, as I mentioned before, with the window locks. It might include meticulously cleaning, avoidance, as we talked about with Billy Bob Thornton, hand washing, and so on. So these behaviors...
Hand washing is a biggie.
Yeah, and these aren't just a regular amount of times, or it's not just a little bit overboard. It's an irrational amount of times that you're doing these things. I want to just highlight that because, I know people that follow the 20-second hand washing to a T, and they never, stray away from that 20 seconds. And, they do it pretty frequently in my line of work, working with individuals in residential settings. We wash our hands pretty frequently because we have to touch a lot of surfaces and things, but still that would be rational.
Because if we hit you with the or what, you'd say, or my hands will be dirty and I'll have germs.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Not like,
I just touched something very sticky and I don't know what it was.
I don't like it.
And I don't like it.
But yeah, so that's not, and someone with OCD would be doing those hand washing things, sometimes to the point of their hand, like damaging their own skin. And they would be doing it because if they don't do it, something bad's going to happen that's completely irrational and has nothing to do with washing hands.
Yeah. I used to work with an individual who would go into the bathroom, and we had to basically make sure that he didn't lock the door to the bathroom when he would go in, and we would just make sure we were paying attention to the time. Because if we didn't pay attention to the time, 20, 30 minutes would go by. We would look into the bathroom to see how he's making out, and he would be basically taking a shower in the sink. He would just start, fully scrubbing his body with the soap. It would start off with just his hands, and the next thing you know, it's his upper arms, it's his face. He's taking his shirt off. It was a whole thing. And in public, we'd be at like a public restroom doing this.
Yeah, why not?
Break away from doing that.
Well, so you're bringing up a good point that it's a huge time suck. I remember a patient telling me a story that he's at the mall and he's walking by a store and he sees pants on the hangers, and they're like all hanging in a line. And one was just askew a little bit. And it's not so much that he wanted them to be in order, but something about that sort of called to him. And he got like 3 stores down. He's with his friends. And then he had to make up an excuse to go back and just like fix the pants a little bit. And he was telling me like, it felt so ridiculous that I'm doing it. Like, why am I going all the way back here to do it? But yet he knows it's irrational. He knows that thing that's going to happen, like something's going to happen to his family if he doesn't do it. He knows that's completely, but just in case, he does it.
Yeah.
And then what he just did by validating himself, again, he told his brain that you're right. This is dangerous and you should do it. And he also got that dopamine. And so that his brain's going to remember what he did to feel good. Because that's all dopamine does. It makes you feel good. What did I do to feel good? I made you do something irrational at the mall and you had to go fix those pants. Or you had to listen to this obsession and follow through with whatever ritual is necessary, right? It's tough.
So I think we highlighted obsessions, what compulsions would be like. What causes this, Greg? What causes you to be OCD?
Well, I mean, who really knows? I guess intrusive thoughts in general, but I don't really. Do we have an answer to that? So is it biological?
I think there's a combination of things. I did read some studies that genetics play a part in it, family history, and experiences as well. I kind of understand that. And I heard someone give an example and it made a lot of sense to me, not stating that I have OCD. I do not. But I can understand how it could develop. All right. So, for example, I was listening to somebody talking about, I think it was in their school, they had a response that they had to appropriately wash their hands a certain way. And if they didn't do it this specific amount of time and the specific way they were supposed to do it, they were disciplined and made to redo it again. So for this person, they started to identify that this was what they felt was the start. Now, was there some genetic traits that made them more susceptible to it? Possibly, I have no idea. But this experience they felt like was what later in life has led to them having OCD around contamination. And it was this like rigid discipline to do it correctly and having to do it. And if you didn't, there would be a negative response tied into not doing it correctly and exactly how it was supposed to be done and frequently. So I kind of understand that. And let me explain why. When I was when I was a teenager, my friend's house caught on fire. And that stuck with me because I literally watched, the aftermath of that. He lived down the road from me. So I was there, he got home. They weren't home. He did have a family member who was home and a family pet that didn't survive. So it was very sad. And that stuck with me significantly. And after that, I remember, and it was an electrical fire. So then in my head, the connection to, this causes this. And then, that constant thought for a long period of time. And it sticks with me now. I often wonder about things that could trigger fires. Like it's a thought that I have. It's not for me. It's not an obsession, but it's a thought.
No, but it seems like trauma though, more, doesn't it? Because it's almost like you're looking for rational obsessions. Maybe you're a little too hypervigilant when it comes to things that could cause a fire. And that could be an irrational fear.
I feel like if I was more susceptible to being OCD, or maybe if it impacted me a little stronger, it could have turned into more of an obsession. I feel like, and it just made that connection for me when I heard about that person's experience. And then I thought about that because that is something that kind of always sticks to me. And I actually think that that's even like more of an old school. I think when I was raised, it was always like, oh, make sure you unplug this before you leave the house.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like I don't let my kids unplug things, and I don't even know why. Is it dangerous to unplug things? I don't know, but no one's allowed to do it. Like if someone goes near a plug, I'm like, no, you know what I mean? It's like, my father all the time would be like nuts about that. And I guess that could turn into this irrational or hypervigilance for safety, which could kind of blossom out to a lot of different things. And
So-
I guess you're right. It could turn into like, oh, I'm obsessively checking outlets, you know?
Yeah,
But maybe
yeah.
that's, like those kinds of things.
So that's kind of how I started to see how life experience and family history, how that can all kind of tie in and possibly create something where it becomes an obsession.
My stuff would be off the wall, though. It'd be like if I didn't step over a crack with my left foot first, and you know, it's like that step on a crack, break your mother's back. It would be like step over a crack wrong, and everyone's passing away. That's what it was like. People must have
made up your own superstitions.
Sure. Yeah. Like I was a very, well, I mean, I think that's kind of what we all do. And I think that's why OCD can be in a lot of ways difficult to treat, but it's actually not that difficult to treat, but it's unique because we're all so different. So we all sort of have our own obsessions that develop in isolation inside of our minds. And we have these compulsions to fix them. Like, you know, a lot of mine would be like looking up at the sky before I walk in the door. Why? I don't know, but that's just what developed. Or definitely stepping over a crack with my left foot was huge. Shoes, I still wouldn't dare to this day put on a right shoe first. No, thank you, sir. I don't know. The world would end.
So something about the left side for you.
Maybe, yeah. I'm left-handed. It's, you know, I don't know, but it's I don't even know if it's that connected. It's just something that developed inside of me. Maybe it's something, you know, it could go back to when I was little and I avoided something somehow, and my brain, the back of my brain, the antiquated parts of my brain remembered that, and it was like, oh, if I would have stepped with my right foot first, I would have got hit by a car, right? And that's just in there. Who knows? But they just develop into these strange things.
So let me ask you, Greg, does the thought come up first, or does like the crack show up and then the thought just suddenly is there? Are you looking for the crack, or is the crack just there and then all of a sudden the thought comes up?
The crack would have to be there first in that instance. And I think they are situational and they are sort of environmental, which is why avoidance is so important when it comes to OCD and anxiety in general, because if I'm not going to step on any cracks if I stay in my house, you know? So that becomes part of it. But I mean, I remember one of my first job interviews, I was interviewed by a woman who happened to be blind. Yeah. And I had an intrusive thought I might have told this story.
Yeah, you did. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I won't tell it again, but it's just, you have these intense, you know, thoughts. But enough about me. Where do we move on from here?
So I'll just go over the signifiers real quick, and then I am going to ask you more questions. So for signifiers, like we were saying, you know, not everything that we do or every habit that we have is OCD. So some signifiers that you might have OCD is that you can't control the thoughts or behaviors, even when those thoughts or behaviors are recognized as excessive. Spending at least an hour a day on those thoughts or behaviors. Not getting pleasure when performing the behaviors or rituals, or they feel very like a brief relief from the anxiety that the thoughts cause. And the experiences, you experience significant problems in daily life due to the thoughts or behaviors. So it's starting to impact maybe work or maybe your personal life or your social life, something like that.
Yeah, like the guy with the pants. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
You know, like, where'd you go? Oh,
you know, I kept hearing this example as I was doing research of like somebody worried that they left like the stove on, and, you know, they're checking it 1,000 times. And then like, you know, then they're like, oh, well, maybe when I just checked it, I accidentally turned it on when I walked by it or something. And then they had the thought that like, then they kind of gave the example, then they go to work and they're still having these thoughts. So they actually leave work to go home to check it. And then when they go back, they're like, well, maybe so-and-so came home and now they turned it on. And, you know, wow, imagine that. I just, like, just even hearing that example, I'm like, that's like a little torture, mental torture right there.
It is. It's torturous. It's really tough. And it's, you know, this is one of the few, well, I shouldn't say few, but this is very, very treatable though. So I keep plugging that in every once in a while, because I feel like we are, and especially when we talk about things like pure OCD. And pure OCD is a little different because, you know, we talked a lot about compulsions and all these checking and rechecking. whatever it is. But pure OCD happens all inside the mind. So your obsession and your compulsion both take place inside your mind. And that's the ones we alluded to a little bit, but like, the homosexuality one, pedophilia, hurting yourself or family, obsessively thinking about whether or not you remember to breathe or swallow with religion. Yeah, no, it happens. Don't start thinking about it.
That reminds when we do breathing exercises or like mindfulness techniques, I always hate the breathing strategies.
Me too.
Because then I'm afraid I don't know how to breathe without thinking about it. And
yeah, you're like, I'm terrible at breathing.
When does the automatic breathing just restart? And then I'm like obsessing about it. That would be something for me. But
maybe, hey, listen, maybe you got a little taste of OCD. Who knows?
I think everybody does, right?
Oh yeah. Mental illness. We're all in the spectrum of every single one somewhere. I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Sacrilegious or blasphemous beliefs, like thinking of like bad things about Jesus or Mary or anyone, those things. Hurting family members is a huge one. So what would the compulsions look like though for something like that? You to do that all inside of your head, it's like silent counting, praying, obviously, phrases in your head. You try to think of, like, say these huge phrases that you develop out of nowhere in your head because they kind of outweigh the intrusive thoughts. And these are kind of tough too, because it's hard to get help for these, because there's a lot of shame and guilt talking to a therapist about, I had these weird sexual thoughts about a religious figure, or I think about harming children. Like, that's a hard conversation to have, even though as soon as someone starts having that conversation and we see how distressed they are talking about it, we're going to immediately be like, oh, okay, like this is a good person. They hate these thoughts, and make them feel better about it. But trying to push those thoughts away, that's avoidance. So trying to push those thoughts away in your head, it's just going to make them come back stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah. And that's exactly like what I was talking about with that teenager that I mentioned earlier with the thoughts of pedophilia. He tries to avoid them. So I've been working with him on not avoiding them and letting them kind of pass by and, acknowledge them, but don't give them any more weight than they deserve. So that's interesting, because I think our natural response, if we have a thought that's uncomfortable, is to avoid it.
Yeah, that's just never going to be, because if we're avoiding something, we're telling our brain that's an actual danger. And if we're telling our brain it's an actual danger, it's going to do things to protect us from it. And that's going to be maladaptive. And even if you wanted to meditate or whatever, and sort, like, look at anything around you in your room. Like, pick one thing and then just focus back on the podcast. And now don't think at all about that thing you looked at. It's like impossible. You can't choose what comes into your brain and what doesn't. If that's not what makes a person good or bad, it's not the thoughts that we have that define our character. It's our actions. It's what we do with those thoughts. How we treat people. That's defines who we are. I feel like a lot of times people will think, why am I the kind of person that's having these horrible thoughts? What's wrong with me? Why would I think like that? And if you had those thoughts and loved them, yeah, there might be an issue. But since you don't, feel good about that. So what should we talk about now, Dave?
So harm OCD?
Quick. It's very similar to pure OCD. It's just those unwanted images, thoughts, ideas, impulses, especially about hurting people. And again, I know we're sort of beating a dead horse here, but they highlight your values. They don't highlight who you are. They highlight who you're not.
Right.
Right?
All right. So then I guess we should discuss some of the treatments.
Oh, okay.
And I think that when we look at the treatments, the first one is medication. I know that people have benefited from taking some medications, and some people, it's not for them. And that's totally their choice.
But there is one interesting thing that's kind of down the pike that's kind of new, and that's, have you heard of naltrexone?
No.
They use it. They're starting to use it. Well, it's good for addiction because it treats compulsive urges to do something that is not good for you. So that's a familiar theme here. Like, it's sort of, you can relate addiction and OCD. because it's like, I'm doing this compulsion. I'm going back to fix those pants, or I'm flicking the light switch over and over again. I know that's not good for me. I know that's not productive, but I'm compelled to do it anyway. That's very similar to alcohol. It's very similar to, scratching your skin, or trichotillomania where you're pulling your hair out. It's all very similar. And naltrexone can be treated for that. So I don't see why naltrexone shouldn't be a viable treatment for OCD. But again, psychotherapy is the most effective treatment for OCD. It just is.
Yeah.
So what do we got?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
All day.
Since it is essentially about thoughts and intrusive thoughts at that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is geared towards helping people reframe their thoughts and to understand those intrusive thoughts and how they function a little bit better. So, Greg, would you say that that's something that's been helpful for you?
Yes. I think that for me, exposure and response therapy has been the most helpful.
Yeah.
And to the point where it's almost gone. And when I do have an obsession or I don't really worry about it, it doesn't give me the same anxiety, because I know that I'll get that sense of anxiety for a limited period of time. So the exposure and response therapy is essentially, you have that obsession and you know what your compulsion is to fix that. And instead of immediately doing that, you either delay it for even like a few seconds, right? Or you make a variation on it a little bit. Or you get to the point where you completely ignore the compulsion. And that gets to be really difficult. But after a few times and you realizing that thing that you're worried that was going to happen didn't happen, it's very powerful.
I've been doing exposure therapy with you for the last few weeks. I don't know if you even noticed. When you ask me the podcast after we record, you'll always ask me 1,000 times if it was good, if I thought it was good, if I thought it came out all right, if I thought...
And you're always like, no.
I've been messing with you and not answering the question. And I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. I just thought I was playing a prank on you.
Well, let me tell you something. One more thing that's cruel. I'll say that. That I would, but I appreciate it because my anxiety is toned down so much. There's an element of neuroplasticity here. I'm kind of thinking as we're talking about it, because think about it, right? They can visually see in scans when you change a thought that, like, you change like a negative thought to a positive thought. It's not easy. It's not natural at first to start thinking this positive thought instead. So it's the same thing. You're so predisposed to have this automatic natural thought obsession, and you automatically do the compulsion. It's very easy. Your brain does it naturally, and it feels right for your brain. But it's going to feel difficult to do something a little bit different, right? Even if it's a little bit different, you're carving a new pathway. So you're changing the strength of that obsession immediately just by changing the compulsion a little bit. So for example, like if my thought was, if I don't flick the light switch 3 times when I walk in a room, like something bad is going to happen to my family, I'll do it twice. Or I won't do it right away. I'll walk around the house a little bit. You'll feel that anxiety for a while, see how I can work with that, and then go back and do it. Just change it a little bit. It's a good first step.
So riding the wave a little bit.
Ride the wave.
So that's like a great way to look at it, because it's like when someone has those urges for self-harm, that's another way we would encourage them to get through it, is to just kind of embrace those really uncomfortable feelings and emotions that they're having. So you're suggesting the same thing for your compulsions.
Yeah, just absolutely.
Feel uncomfortable and allow yourself to go through that discomfort. But then in the end, the hope is that you'll see, hey, my family didn't all pass away because I didn't flick this light switch one last time. They're still present with me. So that kind of hopefully after time sticks with you and becomes your new truth, right?
Absolutely. And the other part of it is the whole like metacognitive piece. Just to allow those, instead of, you're big into this. You're having like a really, say like a pure OCD thought, like you're going to hurt someone. You're going to do some pedophilia, right? That anxiety that you feel when you get that thought is you trying everything you can to get rid of that thought. You being like, I don't want to think this thought. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I'm thinking of something else. La, 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 whatever, right? If you just let that thought come in and say, this thought is not who I am. It's not me. Just let it be there. And instead of pushing them away, you'll start to realize they don't pop in as much as you think.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the same reaction to them, your body's not going to have the same urgency to get rid of them.
I tell that this story every time I talk to someone who has intrusive thoughts and is in the habit of trying to push them away. I tell the story of this individual I work with who has had frequent suicidal ideation, and he would get these negative, intrusive thoughts frequently. And he eventually took on the philosophy of when they come on, I'm not going to push them away. I'm just going to let them pass. And I'm going to let them know I don't have time for you or I have no need for you, but thanks for stopping by. And he would do this, like actually talking that through and visualizing them as like going by and just telling them I have no use for you today. And it worked. He has his suicidal ideation decreased drastically. And now it feels like almost a thing of the past for him I ask him like how has that been going? It's like, once in a while I'll get it, but it's not even close to the frequency that I used to. And when I tell other people that I'm talking to about that idea of letting it pass by, I think people kind of chuckle at first because it sounds silly. And he even admits, he goes, I think this stuff's ridiculous when I hear it, but I didn't really have a choice because of how bad it was impacting my life. Like he really thought he was going to act on it at some point and that he wasn't going to be around anymore. And he has, so for him, this helped so much. And I'm a true believer in it just from working with him now. I do truly feel like that is something that people can use as a strategy to help decrease. And you may not believe it at first, but eventually you will.
So that reminds me of something that I really wanted to bring up, and that is that episode of Invisibilia. So this was a great example because it had all the elements. It had someone who thought they were not a good person because of their OCD, avoidance, and maybe the destruction of their own family. So this person, great person, never had any problems, no history of violence ever. One day had this intrusive thought, what if I stab my wife, right? So he had this thought, and he was so horrified that he would think of something like that. And it scared him so much that he would do it, that he removed all the knives from the house. And from there, the thoughts kept coming, well, what if you do this to them? Well, what if you do that to them? And so he eventually removed himself from the house, all because of these thoughts, which essentially thoughts aren't anything, right? Just because you have a thought doesn't mean you're going to act on it at all. And it doesn't define who you are. So here he is, avoiding everything so much to the point where he's living alone in an apartment because his own thoughts are saying that he's a danger to his family, even though he feels like he would never want to hurt his family. So why would he, right? So he goes to this therapist, and this therapist starts doing work with him, and the exposure is so intense at first. Did you hear about this?
I don't believe so.
So the therapist says to him, what are your thoughts? Like instead of pushing them away, he wants to hear them. He wants to hear about his intrusive thoughts. And the guy says, I would even, I just feel like I'm going to kill someone. I feel like I'm a killer. I'm afraid that I'm a murderer. That's like where it's gotten to. And so the therapist went out to the office kitchen, got a knife, put it, and I don't recommend doing this, but put it in the patient's hand and said, if you're such a killer, and he like literally put it like right like up to his chest. And he said, you're a killer? Do something, like kill me. And the guy obviously just like couldn't bring himself to do it. And the therapist was like, you're at the brink of being a murderer at any second in your mind. At any second, you could just go on a killing spree. But when you have a knife pressed up against someone's chest, you have the control to not do a thing about it. So what does that really say about you? Right? So that's from there on, he can start to have a little bit more comfort with like who he is and what he really will do versus what he thinks he'll do. It's two different things.
Right.
Like I don't recommend that at all, but I definitely have had that scenario where it's people think they're going to go crazy and you just tell them, go crazy, say something crazy, and you tell them like, say this like really loud, and they won't. But it's like, but if you're crazy, you would definitely say that. It's just exposure. Exposure is so important.
It's funny because if it was the opposite, we don't pay it as much attention, or we don't give it as much weight, or that doesn't mean anything. So if I have all these thoughts about these things that I could do that would be awesome and everyone would love it, and I'm not brave enough to actually do these things, or I'm not like bold enough to like do these awesome things that I'm in my mind I envision myself doing. Like that's just normal. But if I have in my mind I'm doing something super negative, like I truly believe that's who I am, but I never believe I'm those awesome things that I see myself doing in my head. It's a very strange thing.
Because Dave, it's that thing. They don't highlight. Intrusive thoughts are intrusive by nature because they don't highlight who you are. They highlight who you're not. And that's why they don't feel good. Right?
It doesn't it also kind of highlight that thing I mention this pretty frequently, but like humans are just programmed. I feel like we're programmed to hyper focus on the negative. So, like I said, if I have these thoughts of myself being awesome, I don't even pay them any mind. I'm like, oh, I would never do that thing. I discredit it completely. I'm like, I could never do that. I would never go up on, in front of this group of people and just start belting out this song. Like some people could never do karaoke, right? They might envision in their head them doing and like karaoke, everyone's cheering for them, but they'll never actually do it. Some people will, but not everybody. But then they have this negative thought of themselves and they're like terrified of it. We just hyper focus on the negative. And I say this all the time. And, when we're talking about when a kid does something wrong, we like yell and scream at them. When they do something that's just okay, we don't even pay attention to it. When they do something good, we'll tell them it maybe once out of every 10 times.
Well, Dave, negative keeps you alive. Negative has kept us alive for hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
You going up to someone and telling them something negative. Hey, there's a dangerous wildebeest or woolly mammoth around the corner. That keeps people alive. That's the dopamine thing. That's a good thing. That's useful, right? Telling someone there's berries around the corner, that's not useful. That's useful to you. So you keep that to yourself. You know what I mean? So I always go back to like evolution. This is where this stuff comes from. We just have to figure out, when did this make sense?
And you say that with like berry seeds stuck between your teeth.
Where's the berry? I don't know.
Tell me where those berries are, Greg.
I haven't seen any berries around here in a long time. Watch out for the saber-toothed tiger, though. He's around the corner.
He's right next to that berry bush over there. Don't go over there. All right.
So, one more thing, though, Dave. Getting over that obsessive urge. We've talked about this before. An urge for OCD, an urge for alcohol, an urge for all these things. They feel like they hit this crescendo where it's like, if I don't do the compulsion, my head's going to blow off. But urges are like hunger pains. If you just hang on a little bit longer, it starts to subside. And then it'll pick up again. But it's a cycle. So you just have to get past that point. And once you do that, it's like a panic attack. Once you don't take that Xanax and you realize that this panic attack has a peak and then it starts to come down, the same thing with an OCD urge. It has a peak and it'll start to come down. So just wait it out.
But the thing I know is when you're in the middle of that, whatever that urge is, and it's so strong, you don't feel like it's going to go away. And I really, really understand, but encourage you to know that it does pass. Everything passes at some point. That feeling is not going to be forever. And I think that humans, sometimes we don't feel like that's true. When we're in the middle of something really tough, we don't see the end. So we just feel like, oh, I want it to go away right now.
Yeah. And when you do that thing, I totally agree with you. You feel like that. Trust me, from personal experience, you feel like this thing is never going to go away. And you're going to be laying in bed 12 hours later, still like stewing and like writhing about this compulsion that you didn't complete. But the reality is, if you do complete the compulsion, you're guaranteeing that the feelings will never go away.
Yeah.
And they'll keep coming and they'll get stronger and stronger and they'll expand and they'll just limit your life. And that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah. So quick relief equal bad. That's the moral of the podcast.
Always. Just ask Robert Johnson, right? He sold his soul. It's quick relief.
Allegedly.
That's true. Yeah. We're not sure. Well, Dave, I think we covered OCD here, didn't we?
Yeah, I think so.
I hope we did.
Yeah.
All right. So we did another mental health disorder, which is always daunting and nerve-wracking for me, because we want to do this justice. And we know that there's things that maybe we didn't mention, or things, but we want to get people talking about it. We want to get people thinking about it. And hopefully what we talked about helps some people.
Yeah. No, and Greg, thanks for sharing your experiences with OCD a little bit. I wasn't aware of a lot of that, or pretty much any of it, until last week. So
no, you don't lead with that. You don't lead with that when you meet people. You be like, I used to be a weird little boy.
So it's really interesting. And, I feel like I've gotten to know you a little bit. I'm sure the listeners feel like they've gotten to know a different side of you. So thank you. I know that the tone in this one was probably a little bit more straight than the tone in our Robert Johnson episode, but that's the way these episodes go. Some are more of a serious take, and some a little bit more loosey goosey. So
yeah, I mean, we try to be a little bit of humor, but hey, in the end, OCD's, well, I shouldn't say there's nothing funny about OCD. I mean, we did mention Breaking Wind. That's kind of funny. But I mean, some of these things, I always say, like, if you can try to laugh at these things, like if you can talk about your obsessions and compulsions out loud, sometimes you can see how irrational they are, and that helps a little bit. Maybe laughing about it helps too.
For sure. So,
all right.
Well, we will be back next week, as always, with another interesting topic. And this one is definitely Greg's new favorite topic and favorite episode.
You guys are gonna love it. They just keep getting better and better. How can they not be my favorite, right?
Seriously. Everyone has done the other. It's insane. So
I feel like this one's about me, so.
All right. Well, everyone, have a great night. We want to also just thank you again for, sharing this with people, for giving us feedback. And we encourage you guys, if you do love what you hear and you haven't done so already, please leave a rating or review, I should say. We super appreciate it. It's great to hear what you guys think about the episodes, but also it's a way for this to be more accessible to others. Mm-hmm. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Have a great night.
All right.
Say good night, Greg.
Good night, Dave.
Good night, Greg Odie.
All right. Cut.